Good morning, everyone. This is John Bourne from Data Recognition Corporation, DRC, the company that administers the NSCAS alternate test for the state of Nebraska. I'm going to begin the training session here in just a minute, but we have a few words first from the Department of Education. Sharon Heater, I'll be unmuting your phone here in just a second, and you'll switch over and become a panelist, so give the system a little bit of a second to catch up as that happens. All right, Sharon, you should be set to go. I'll unmute you. Go right ahead.
Good morning, everyone. This is Sharon Heater with the department, and welcome to a wonderful presentation that John's going to give you.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. I'll be sharing my presentation with you, and also be sharing the DRC Insight portal system live so that you can see a live demonstration of how to access the different applications that you're going to use in support of the NSCAS alternate assessment this year. For those of you who are familiar with the administration of the NSCAS alternate from previous years, there have not been very many significant changes. I'll be covering the highlights, of course, of any changes that have occurred. But first of all, some key dates. I want you to keep in mind that everything revolves around the testing window. We get the student information from the Department of Education on January 15th, so that we can prepare all of the systems that you'll be utilizing starting this coming Monday on February 17th. So we have test administration training just ahead of the access of enabling access to those systems to district assessment contacts. Systems that you'll be able to access in support of the NSCAS alternate administration are student and test management in the DRC Insight portal. Again, that access will begin for you on Monday, February 17th, and will continue until the end of the testing window on May 1st. About 2 weeks later, we'll provide access to print-on-demand student test booklets and test administration manuals for the NSCAS alternate assessments via the DRC Insight portal. And I'll be showing you in the course of this training exactly how to access those documents, where you can find them and where you can print them. The testing window, of course, as I said, is what all of this activity revolves around. And at the end of the testing window, we need to make sure that all student information has been updated. This would include demographic information, what we refer to as student details in the student management application, any accommodations that the students may have used in the course of testing, and any testing codes or reasons not tested that may apply to a student. Basically, by the end of the testing window, for any student that's inside the DRC Insight portal, the system formerly known as eDirect, any student that's recorded in there should either have a test result or a testing code indicating the reason they weren't tested. As has been the case for the past 2 years, the NSCAS alternate is delivered online via the DRC Insight secure web browser. This means that students that are capable of using touch-enabled devices such as an iPad or a touchscreen device, or students who actually have experience using computer-based input devices like a mouse in the course of their daily education, can respond to items directly themselves in the DRC Insight system. However, for this population, if a student cannot select responses in DRC Insight themselves, proctors capture those responses and enter them into the online system to be scored. Should you have any students that need to test on paper, as I mentioned when I was going over the key dates, we do have on-demand, print-on-demand student test booklets available that do contain the contents of the test that the test administrators can use with the test administration manual in the familiar process from the days before that the tests were available in DRC Insight. However, districts no longer receive or return any test materials. And right up front, because it is an important aspect of online administration, keep in mind that test administrators and proctors are not required to navigate through every item on the test if a student has administered the test, but does not or ceases to respond to items. Tests may be ended in the online system on the last item that was administered to the students. So you don't have to click through item by item. If the student stops responding to the test, you can simply use the end test button to exit the test. There is a proctor training video that provides detailed direction on administering the NSCAS alternate tests online. This is posted to the NDU assessment webpage. This PowerPoint too, it bears mentioning, I'm sorry I meant to do that at the beginning of this presentation. It bears mentioning that this PowerPoint is currently available on the NDU website as well. You can download it there. It's also available in the DRC Insight portal document section. You can download that this PowerPoint and use that for your use as well. The proctor training itself is also available for downloading from either the NDU website or the DRC Insight portal document section. And again, I'll be showing you how to access the DRC Insight portal document section in just a second. I've had a few chat messages come in, so I'm going to check that real quick to make sure that there's nothing that needs attention immediately before I continue with the presentation. The chat is not appearing for me. I'm sorry. I'm just going to continue with the presentation for now then. Keep in mind that for NSCAS alternate testing, there are grades 3 through 8 and 11 tests available for the population that takes the alternate assessment. That's in English language arts and mathematics. Science is available at grades 5, 8, and 11. Typically, these students wouldn't take the ACT. And one second while I handle the audio here.
John, this is Sharon. I'll monitor the chat for you.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's not appearing for me for some reason. I'm sorry. Oh, there it is. All right. Yeah, Sharon, feel free to just bring up any questions that may pop up if you think they should be answered in the course of the presentation.
Okay, will do.
Okay, thank you for that, everybody. Students are required to take all subjects of either the NSCAS General or the NSCAS alternate tests for their eligible grades. Students may not take the NSCAS alternate for some subjects and the NSCAS General for other subjects. So no mixing. Make sure that the students that are taking the alternate assessment take all subjects of the alternate assessment. Likewise, that same rule applies to the general assessment. When it comes to scheduling the test, this procedure has not changed from the past. You have 6 full weeks to schedule the test. There's a 7th week that is intended for makeups, and makeups are required. So you do have a total of 7 weeks to complete testing the students that are scheduled to take the NSCAS alternate tests. It's recommended that you schedule early in the window so that makeups can occur should they need to by May 1st when the testing window closes. To facilitate, to provide flexibility in scheduling testing across multiple sessions and days for this population, the DRC Insight online student test tickets do not actually expire for the NSCAS alternate test. I'll describe a little bit more how those tickets work later on in the presentation, but essentially the tickets don't expire until you say the test is done. You can access the test multiple times a day or even across multiple days. Be certain that the proctors understand the key dates that I provided before and the district-specific testing schedule. So as you determine your schedule within the flexibility provided in these parameters, make sure that you communicate that schedule to those individuals who are responsible for testing. We have our test security reminders as well. Keep in mind that tests are to be administered on a one-to-one basis for the NSCAS alternate test, unlike the NSCAS General where group testing may occur. And also, the test content does actually need to be reviewed by those individuals who are directly responsible for test administration. So test administrators and proctors should have access to the NSCAS alternate administration manuals ahead of testing and become familiar with the test format prior to administration, so that they're able to give the test to the student in the best possible manner. That said, just like the general assessment, where the test administrators and proctors may not actually see the content, even though they're seeing the content here, they are responsible for not discussing, disseminating, or otherwise revealing the contents of the test to anyone, except in the course of the actual administration of the test to the student, of course. Likewise, anybody who accesses this content should not keep, copy, or reproduce any of that test content. All printed materials must be destroyed locally by the end of the testing window, and those printed materials that provide access to secure test content, in the case of the NSCAS alternate, are the administration manuals and the student test booklets that I mentioned previously, as well as the online test tickets that provide login information for the students. As I've said before, the administration manuals and student test booklets are available in a print-on-demand format from the DRC Insight portal. If you do make copies of those files, you're responsible for destroying and deleting them, deleting them, and removing them from your systems, just like you would be for destroying printed materials. Again, that should occur by the end of the testing window on May 1st. And the other standard rules for test security do apply. Students must not be left alone with test materials. Students cannot take test materials out of the testing site. And no one should coach or provide feedback in any way to the student being tested, including prompting or answering questions related to the contents of the test. Proctors and test administrators should not alter, influence, or interfere with the test response in any way. And there are more details about these test security procedures in the print-on-demand NSCAS alternate administration manuals. I have covered the important points here, though. A main responsibility for district assessment contacts and their designees is to make sure that the student information that's on file for students is accurate, and that any information that needs to be provided for students in the course of the administration of the test is provided. Students identified an advisor as taking the alternate assessment are pre-assigned to online test sessions. That would have been the data that I mentioned on the key dates slide, where that we received on January 15th. If a student has joined your district joined your district after January 15th, or was not identified in the advisor system prior to January 15th, and you do need to administer the NSCAS alternate test to that student, you will need to add that student to the student management application in the DRC Insight portal. Again, in the course of this training, I'll be showing you how to do that. And the student will need to be assigned to NSCAS alternate test sessions. We basically have three categories of information that you're responsible for reviewing and, in the case of new students, adding. The first are student details. Again, these student details are pre-coded for pre-identified students, but must be entered for new students. And then accommodations and testing codes are only collected in the DRC Insight portal student management application for the NSCAS alternate test. So you must enter the accommodations and testing codes for any students whenever they apply. You're going to see this reminder at the bottom of a number of the slides in the course of this presentation. All of the information that needs to be entered for a student must be entered, either the test results or any of this information related to the student's demographics or their accommodations and testing codes, all need to be entered by the end of the testing window on May 1st. And this is the point where I'm going to switch from the PowerPoint presentation, so bear with me as I start sharing instead. Oops, sorry. Sharing instead, in this case, Google Chrome and the DRC Insight portal. If you haven't been in the system since last year's testing window, you'll see that the DRC Insight portal, as I said, the system formerly known as eDirect, has had a bit of a facelift. However, your username and passwords are the same. If you happen to use any other online testing program that DRC provides, you will have the ability to select that program here. If you only are using this for the NSCAS alternate tests, it'll default and open to this page directly, which is known as our welcome page. The welcome page, as I said, has had a bit of a facelift. Instead of the all applications menu up in the left-hand corner, now you have my applications. And you're going to open my applications. To access student detail, you're going to go to the participant preparation category and select student management. Now, in the course of the training today, I'm not going to show the steps that precede this again. I'm going to take you to student detail here in just a moment for these students. And then when we come back to the system, as I demonstrate other access to other areas, we'll be leading off from here. Here you'll select manage students. You may not see all the same options that I have here. You'll see the options that you need to execute the duties that you have that are assigned to you for the NSCAS alternate tests. On the Manage Students tab, you see a number of search criteria for finding students that are enrolled in your district and school. The first thing that you'll need to select will be the administration, the 2019-2020 NSCAS alternate administration. And then for your district, typically, a district assessment contact only has access to their own district, so the district might be pre-populated, and then you'd have to select your schools individually. Now, I'm actually not going to, pick a finer level of detail for my search results here. I'm just going to find all of the students in my sample district here. This is probably true for a number of the districts. For the NSCAS alternate, you might not have a very large population testing. For the bigger districts, of course, that won't be the case, but I'm just going to hit this find students here so that you can see what a little bit more of a, I guess, robust set of search results might look like. You can see every student in every grade within my district here. This particular sample district only has a single school anyway, so picking another school wouldn't have given us any different results. But as you can see, each student's name is listed here individually. And again, it's all based on the search criteria above. So if you're not seeing a student for any reason, you might want to check the search criteria to make sure that you didn't unintentionally exclude them in the results for some reason. You have an action button next to each student name, and to both view and edit any of the information that I mentioned previously in the presentation, you will select the View Edit button, and you see that you have a series of tabs related to the student. My Adam Alpha student here, student detail, first and foremost here, has information related to the district and school, date of birth, grade, gender, and then race, ethnicity. You can edit this information. Just be sure that if you make any changes or if you add any information to a student, that you select Save at the bottom of the screen, and you'll get a friendly message indicating that your information for that student was updated successfully. I also want to draw your attention here before I leave this page to the fact that it came back, it returned the results, the same search results that were entered previously. So you can work on a specific task for multiple students relatively easily inside the system, because you'll be able to come back to the previous search results rather than having to do new searches for each individual student. And that's how you'll access and edit student detail. I'm going to take us back to the PowerPoint presentation right now. What you see on these slides, and I'm going to skip over these rather quickly, is just step-by-step instructions to do exactly what I just showed you how to do. I think the step-by-step instructions are a useful reference to anybody who may not get to this activity for a little while, so you can access these step-by-step instructions in the slide. There is also a DRC Insight Portal user guide that's available in documents that takes you through these steps, although it may not take you through it kind of element by element, student detail, accommodations, testing codes, that sort of thing, as I'm doing here in the presentation. Main point that I'd like you to note when updating student detail in the DRC Insight portal is that you're not actually updating that information in Advisor at the same time. You do need to do that separately. If you find any information for students who are pre-identified as taking the alternate assessment on January 15th that is in error or has changed, do make sure that you update their information in Advisor as well, because NDE, after testing is completed, will verify student information before reporting. Moving on to accommodations. As I said, accommodations are something that need to be reported in the DRC Insight portal student management application whenever they apply to any of the students taking the NSCAS alternate tests. The NSCAS accessibility manual on the ND website is the source of information for how to select, administer, and evaluate the use of accessibility supports for instruction and assessment. So access that NSCAS accessibility manual on the ND website in order to find out how those apply to assessment. There are no specific accommodated versions of the NSCAS alternative test available. However, districts may provide tests in other formats such as large print that may support the student's primary mode of communication. If districts do produce any other formats of the test, anything that contains secure test content, those tests must be securely destroyed at the end of the testing window on May 1st, just like the secure versions of the print-on-demand test administration manuals and student booklets. Keep in mind also that while ND does not provide manipulatives or objects for the NSCAS alternate tests, they are allowed if their use is a normal part of the student's instruction and in the student's IEP. The categories of accommodations to be reported for the 2020 NSCAS alternate are the same as they were in 2019. If you do use the print-on-demand student booklets to administer the test to the student on paper, you need to indicate in the DRC Insight portal that the paper pencil accommodation was used. Likewise, mathematical supports, any assistive technology, or specialized presentation of the test, as identified again from the accessibility manual that I mentioned earlier. These categories must be reported in the DRC Insight portal. And as you can see here, we return to a slide with that step-by-step instruction format that I described earlier. In the case of accommodations, I'm going to be showing you two options for updating accommodations. One, to do them individually, which is a very similar process to what I showed you for student detail, and also the ability to assign the same accommodation to multiple students. So again, I think the quickest and best way for you to experience this will be in the DRC Insight portal. Leaving the PowerPoint behind, I'm going to go back to, I'll use Brian Bravo's example today for the accommodations changes. But as you can see, like I said, I didn't change my search criteria. I'm just going to use the search results that I had before. And I'm going to click on the View Edit button for Brian Bravo. The Edit Student window that you saw before for student details opens again, and this time you want the Accommodations tab. And you can see here that previously I indicated that Brian was going to take the NSCAS alternate test on paper, but instead I'm going to administer the test online. So I'm going to remove those accommodations here, hit that ever important save button, get my message that Brian's record was updated successfully, and administer the test to Brian online instead of on paper. So pretty straightforward, easy to update those accommodations. As you saw, there were check boxes for each grade, or I'm sorry, each subject, not each grade, for each subject that the student's being administered. The way to update accommodations, the same accommodation for multiple students, and we find that this is, again, probably more common for larger districts though, is to use the check boxes in the search results for each of these individual students. Pick a few of the students, the few students that need to have the same accommodation applied. And then at the bottom of the search results screen, you have an update accommodations button. By selecting update accommodations, you see a very informative message that says the accommodation selected or checked below can be either assigned or removed from the students selected on the previous screen. So you don't see the list of students here. You have to know which students you selected on the previous screen, but you can indicate that all of these students have mathematical supports. Hit that ever important save button. And you've updated all of their accommodations, all the accommodations for those 3 students in one fell swoop. Leave the Insight portal behind here. I'm going to click through my step-by-step instructions. Again, there are those instructions for entering and editing accommodations individually. There's the friendly reminder to make sure that you do that by May 1st. And then there's the second option for assigning the same accommodation to multiple students using those checkboxes that I described. And now we move on to testing codes. As you might imagine, since you saw a testing codes tab, the process for updating testing codes isn't terribly different, but there have been a few slight changes to testing codes this year that I want to highlight. Testing codes do one of 2 things. They either indicate reasons that students weren't tested, or they indicate specific conditions that apply to some students who were tested. I'll go over what those not tested reasons are and the conditional reasons that you need to indicate for students who were tested here in more detail. Keep in mind that testing codes affect how student results are reported in the statewide accountability system. And keep in mind that testing codes are not pre-coded. As I mentioned earlier, every student in the DRC Insight portal, in the student management application specifically, must have either a completed test result or a testing code indicated by the end of the testing window on May 1st. A few of the testing codes, there are a couple of newer testing codes that are being collected for the NSCAS alternate for the first time this year. You should recognize them as codes that are available for the NSCAS general assessment as well. Emergency medical waiver involves waivers that are granted through the ND statewide assessment office, and those scores are waived. No longer enrolled applies to students who were either pre-coded based on that January 15th student data or added to the system after you gain access on February 17th, who changed schools before they're tested. Whenever that occurs, an administrator at the original school needs to go in and indicate that student is no longer enrolled in their school, so that there's no score expected for that student at that school when it comes time to do reporting. Students with the no longer enrolled testing code have their scores waived. The first new code on our list is district unable to test. Not tested is the specific wording that appears in the system. Students, in these cases, students are not tested for reasons such as suspensions or expulsions or excessive absences, and in these cases, students receive a 0 score. Parent refusal is a code that's been in use previous years as well, and again, the student receives a 0 score for parent refusal. And the 2 final reasons that students may not be tested, student absent for the entire testing window, should be entered whenever a student did not attend school at any point from March 16th to May 1st. Again, the student receives a 0 score in that case. And finally, the last new code here is student refusal. The student's not tested due to a student's refusal to take the test, and again, the student receives a 0 score. Before we jump back into the DRC Insight portal, go over the step-by-step process for editing testing codes. The conditional codes that I mentioned are listed here. The first is a bit of a modification to what was previously known as no response. The student is unable to interact and respond to any item on the test. Students that receive this conditional testing code are given credit for participation. The code must be indicated for each subject separately. We know that these students typically would have this conditional code apply to multiple subjects, but there may be cases where it doesn't. And keep in mind that scores are included in the state accountability system for these students. So whether they interacted with the test or not, they were administered the test, and any test results does count. Before going over the general assessment code, I just want to go over the note that's related to the students being unable to interact and respond to any item on the test. This goes back to the point that I mentioned on the online administration slide. Tests may be ended on the last item administered. Test administrators and proctors are not required to navigate through every item or make the student sit through every item as the proctor navigates through the items. If the student does not or ceases to respond to items, you can simply stop the test there, and everybody can return to their normal day. The other conditional code is general assessment. General assessment, of course, is an indication that the student will be administered the general assessment instead of the NSCAS alternate assessment. So make sure in those cases that the NSCAS, or if the student was registered to take the NSCAS alternate test but will actually take the general assessment, make sure that you log into the DRC Insight portal student management application and select the general assessment testing code. I'm going to go back to sharing the DRC Insight portal here. Select that View Edit button again. Drag the Edit Student window back up into the viewing area of the screen. I am going to just real quickly show you demographics. You can see that demographics is being skipped over. It's not a part of the presentation because they're not applicable for the NSCAS alternate administration. So that tab is not one that you'll need to access, but testing codes is whenever a testing code applies. Now, the reasons not tested that I mentioned are typically mutually exclusive for a given subject. So those are provided here in a drop-down menu by subject. Perhaps the student did not take the LA test with you, but did take the math test with you. You can enter no longer enrolled here. There is no science available at grade 3, so science is left blank. The student is unable to interact and respond to any item on the ELA test or math test or science test. Again, we don't necessarily expect that those values will be different for a given student, but in case they are, you do need to report them separately. And finally, general assessment is simply yes or no. In this case, it's yes. It's assumed no. It's assumed that the student's taking the NSCAS alternate as registered. If you do not select the yes button for general assessment. Again, if you make any changes to any of these tabs, for those changes to really take effect, you have to hit save first, or save after, I'm sorry. I have not made any changes. If you do make a change and decide that you aren't exactly sure whether that change should be applied here, you can hit cancel as well. So the updating of student information, be it student details, accommodations or testing codes is a very, very similar process for each of them. We're going into another responsibility that district assessment contacts typically have or designate to somebody else in the district. Oh, one final note before I do that though, before I move into the new responsibility, students must be assigned to test sessions in order for testing codes to appear. A student must be registered to take a test in order to have a testing code applied to that specific test. That next responsibility that I was mentioning is that district assessment contacts or somebody they designate is responsible for producing and providing the materials that will be used for individuals who are actually proctoring the NSCAS alternate assessment, whether that's a proctor or a test administrator. At a minimum, those individuals are going to need a copy of the NSCAS alternate administration manuals, because those administration manuals contain the item-by-item instructions that the proctor will use to interact with the student and administer the test. Likewise, the proctors will need the online test tickets printed for the DRC Insight Portal test management, printed from the DRC Insight Portal test management application, because the online test ticket must be used to enter student responses, even if the student isn't interacting directly with that test. Optionally are those print-on-demand student test booklets that I mentioned previously. Again, if students require paper pencil administration, you have the ability to do that with the on-demand student test booklets. However, student results must be entered into the DRC Insight system. Very important point to note with the administration manual, student test booklets, and the online test tickets is that they are form specific. To make this easier on districts, each district was pre-assigned either Form A or Form B. So when test management opens up on Monday, February 17th, you'll see that all of your test sessions will be either for Form A or Form B for your specific district. Make sure that the form on the administration manuals and the student test booklets, if you're using them, match the form indicated on the online test tickets. It's very important that that form designation match across all of the components for the test content that are being used for a specific student. All of the print-on-demand documents and any support documents at all that we have for the NSCAS alternate tests are available in the DRC Insight portal under the General Information application. So I'm going to share the DRC Insight portal with you again. And we're going to leave student management behind. But if you go back up to that My Applications menu and switch applications, and you can see that General Information has its own category. When the General Information tabs that are available to you open, select Documents. And you'll only have the Documents tab. The Upload Document tab is mine to provide these documents to you throughout the course of the administration year. As I mentioned before, the online student test booklets, the on-demand student test booklets and test administration manuals will be posted here starting on March 2nd. There are other documents here, though, that you'll want to access. You can see that you can search by individual document types. We have these 3 types of documents for the NSCAS alternate tests. I'm just going to select all, though, to show you all the things that are currently available to you. First, you have the DRC Insight Portal user guide that I mentioned before. That shows you how to use the applications for the system that we're in currently, that I'm demonstrating in currently. If you have, need to reinstall Insight for any reason, we have technology user guides in multiple volumes that are available here as well. And then below the technology user guides, you see that there are online tools training administration manuals and online tools training student test booklets. These emulate the on-demand, print-on-demand materials that will be used for the operational assessment and should be used to give students and proctors practice with using the documents that they'll use in support of the NSCAS alternate tests. These are available year-round. And finally, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the PowerPoints for this presentation is here at the very bottom of this list, and the PowerPoint for the proctor training is also here. You will have the ability to either open this, and to save us time, I'm not going to open these files today, but or you can save it locally. All of the file types are listed here under the action column. Is there a question?
When are the administration manuals available, John?
March 2nd.
Thank you.
Yep, 2 weeks before the window is typically what we do. So you'll have, as I said, you'll have the ability to open these inside your browser window or save them locally and distribute them if you need to. The on-demand test administration manuals and student booklets for the NSCAS alternate are secure documents, as I said, so they are those permissions are limited to users with the district role within the DRC Insight portal. District assessment contacts are the initial users with the district role. They can assign the district role to other users, but keep in mind that anybody with the district role will be able to see those secure test documents, so assign those permissions accordingly. Returning to our presentation, there's the step-by-step instructions for accessing documents, reminders that the secure test content must be destroyed by the end of the testing window if it's downloaded electronically or stored locally. It can't be stored locally beyond the end of the testing window. And that anything that you print must be securely destroyed by the end of the testing window as well. Do not send any materials back to DRC, or not back to DRC. DRC didn't send you any materials. You don't need to send us any. Districts are responsible for the secure destruction of any printed NSCAS alternate materials locally, as well as any digital copies that you may have saved. And the final aspect of administering the test that we'll be going over here will be the test management application. The test management application within the DRC Insight portal is your point of access for printing the online test tickets that I mentioned before that, that test administrators and proctors will need to administer the test to students and to capture student results. You'll need to understand how to add new students to test sessions. I'll be going over a couple of possibilities for that in the course of going over the test management application. And I'll go over how to monitor testing status as well. We're going to dive right into accessing, printing the online test tickets in the DRC Insight portal. I'm going to go back to my applications menu, and this time under test preparation, I am going to select the test management application and manage test sessions. Much like the student management section, you have different search criteria here. And while you're primarily going to be looking for test sessions, if you're looking for a test session that a specific student is in, you can add that student's first name, last name, or their person ID into the search criteria and only see the sessions that apply to that student. Likewise, if you know the name of the session you're looking for, you can search on that criteria. If you want to look specifically for a content area, ELA and math, that would apply to grades 3, 4, 6, and 7. ELA math and science would apply to grades 5, 8, and 11. And if you want to look for a specific assessment, you would have the ability to do that under the assessment drop down. Much like I did with students, though, I don't really need to go into that fine of detail. I don't need to look for a specific student. I'm just going to select show sessions here. And you'll see all of my sessions that are available at Sample District 1, Sample School OTT. Basically what you see here is one session for each grade. The session detail across here has session names, assessment, status of the full session. Status means something else when you're looking at the student level, and I'll be going over that. Shows when you can begin testing and when testing can end. That means all testing must occur between the beginning and the end date, and has that familiar action column, excuse me, the familiar action column for viewing and editing information or performing other actions. To print online test tickets, you have a couple of different methods here. The first, of course, would be print all tickets. If you print all tickets, and I'm not going to click on that because what that's going to do is that's actually going to open up a roster and a couple of pages in a PDF of secure test tickets that access the actual assessment contact. I don't want to do that here on a webinar, but I do want to just show you that the print all tickets page, or print all tickets action, would open those pages of test tickets and the roster with student login information that you'll need to hand off to proctors and test administrators that are responsible for administering the test to students. That's how you get your tickets. Print those up, and the commands that follow will take you through step by step how to get those tickets printed out, and the roster itself contains instructions on how to assemble those tickets for the administration of the test. Now, to add new students to an existing test session, the easiest way to do that, and again, when I say existing test session, it means I'm going to add a student to one of the sessions that I already have assigned and already have created for my school. The easiest way to do that, excuse me, is to go to the View Edit button for that session where you need to add a student. Select that, and you get an Edit Test Session window. In that window, you can look for students who may have been added separately, but you can also add a new student directly in this process using the New Student tab. And you see that basically Student Information tab that you saw in Student Management opens up with student details that you need to enter. You need to provide the first name and last name for the student. Middle initial is optional. Person ID is required. Anything with a red asterisk is required. You have to enter a date of birth for the student, and then gender and race, ethnicity. You can see those aren't necessarily required. However, if you know them, you can match them up to whatever's in the advisor system here by selecting them here. You can also add accommodations at this point if you know the student's that new student's accommodations. Demographics, as I said before, doesn't apply to the NSCAS alternate, so that field can be skipped. And I do want to point out that testing codes options are not active at this point because the student must first be in a test session before they can actually have their testing codes adjusted. So if you're adding a new student to a test session that requires a testing code, you will need to go into student management separately after the fact, after you've added them to the test session, and assign their testing codes within student management. But basically, filling out student detail, accommodations if they apply, and then clicking save down here at the bottom will add your new student. I'm going to click cancel. It will add your new student to the available students window here. You'll highlight the student's name and click add selected, and then the student will be in the session. That's very convenient if you already have a test session created. You will have a test session created for any grade that had students enrolled in the student data that was provided to us on January 15th. So those are the sessions that you would see here when the system opens on February 17th for your access. But what do you do if that initial student data file did not include a student in a grade where you have a new student? You have to add a new student, but also create a new test session. While you could create that test session manually, we have a different recommended process that actually occurs in student management. So I'm going to go back to my student management application here. That process hasn't changed from previous years as well. You click on the Manage Students tab. And of staying on the Manage Students tab, you're going to go to the Upload Multiple Students tab. Upload Multiple Students allows you to create a file. I'm going to open the sample file here to show you what that looks like. That allows you to add students using minimal information, basically the required information that you saw on that student details page. The person ID, the student first name, student last name, district code, school code, grade, and date of birth are the required elements that need to be entered into the data file. Once you have that data file created for your school, you can have multiple schools here, as you can see. You can have multiple grades here. Once you have that data file created for your district, you'd save it to a local location. You'd browse to find that file. I'm not going to go ahead and find a file at this point, just to conserve time here as our training winds up, and then select Upload. When you select Upload, if your file is error-free, if it met all of the conditions that are described in our file layout document here, those students are going to be added to test sessions. If that's a new student for which a test session didn't exist, a new test session will be created automatically, and the student will be added to that test session. If there is already a test session for that grade within the school, the student will actually be added to existing test sessions as well. But again, if that's all you're doing is adding a student to an existing test session, the process that I described previously is probably going to be much simpler for you than creating a file and uploading it. If you have to do both, if you have to upload new students to existing test sessions and create new test sessions, then creating the file is our recommended method. Going to return to our PowerPoint, and you'll see that we went through the process for printing online test tickets. Keep in mind that it's best to add any new students before you print online test tickets. You can print online test tickets individually. That process isn't too cumbersome, but if you know about the students ahead of printing your test tickets and add them beforehand, that will be the most expedient way to get the tickets that you need. Here are the step-by-step instructions for adding new students to an existing test session. Again, if that's a test session that's already been created, go in through the test management application and use that new student button to add the student directly to the test session. But if there's no test session for that grade, use that file upload process that we recommend. When you use the file upload, as I mentioned, that student information that you're submitting is verified against the requirements that appear in the file layout. All you'll need to do after you submit the file, after you upload the file, is check back. When I say a few minutes, all you really need to do is typically refresh the page, and you'll receive a message indicating whether that file is accepted or it generated an error report. If it generated an error report, there will be details on what the problems are. Should be pretty clear what you need to correct. And then you can re-upload that file, and once the file is error-free, the test sessions will be created and the students will be added into the test sessions. So again, that file upload process is recommended when a new test session is needed. There are instructions in the DRC Insight portal for creating a test session manually, but again, it is much less efficient than the process that I just described. And the final element that I want to show you today in the DRC Insight portal is how to monitor testing status. This will be the last time I switch to the DRC Insight portal here. I'm going to leave student management behind and go to test management. Under manage test sessions, I'm going to show my sessions. And the button you're going to want to click to view student status is the Edit Print Ticket Status button. When you select that button, you'll see a search result that shows all the students who are in that session. all of the tests that the students are assigned to take within that session. Since this is grade 3, there would be an ELA test and a math test. And it'll show whether that student has started the test. If the student started the test but not completed it, the status will say in progress. And if the test has been ended, the test will go into a completed status. Those same statuses apply to test sessions, not started, in progress, and completed. But you would only see not started if no student had started the test session. You'd see in progress once any student has started the test session, and you'd only see completed if all students in the test session have completed the test. Going back to the presentation, we'll be concluding this here in just a moment. Here's a description of the three statuses that I mentioned. Not started means the online test ticket has not been used at all. It's not been used online to log into the online DRC Insight system. In progress means the online ticket was used to log into the test, but the test has not been ended. In cases where there's an in progress status, you should only see a started date, time populated on the results that I indicated previously. And once a ticket has been, or once a test has been ended, the status goes to completed. In those cases, both a start time and a completed time are populated on the status results that I described previously. Keep in mind that NSCAS alternate test tickets do not lock after periods of inactivity or overnight to facilitate flexible scheduling. However, if you do end the test and it goes into a completed status, then the test is locked. So tests in a completed status are locked. If you need that test unlocked for any reason, feel free to contact DRC's NSCAS alternate customer service team, either toll free or via email, and we'll be happy to unlock that test for you. And finally, you'll be interested in knowing what your options are for viewing student results. During the testing window, the option that's available to you is the View Online Results application within DRC Insight. I'm not going to show you how to access that today. It's under Report Delivery, the Report Delivery category that appears in the My Applications menu. There's nothing there to show you today, so do keep in mind that View Online Results goes live at the start of the testing window, and you'll have the ability to see preliminary raw scores only for operational tests, for operational items on the tests, when the tests are in a completed status. So the tests do all need to be ended for the scores for those operational items to appear. Also keep in mind that you're only going to see English language arts and mathematics this year. The science tests are comprised entirely of field test items, so there will not be any science results in View Online Results. On June 15th, DRC provides districts with access to preliminary reports and data files via the DRC Insight Report Delivery application, DRC Insight Portal Report Delivery application. Those preliminary results are then reviewed, and there's a process to get any changes to the Department of Education. Once those changes have been applied, we produce final reports and deliver them to districts by July 20th. Those reports and data file are available again in the DRC Insight Portal Report Delivery system. Do keep in mind that any reports that DRC releases to you are embargoed until the public release as determined by the Department of Education. Once the Department of Education has determined when public release will occur, they'll provide that information to you as it's available. And with that, if I haven't answered any of your questions today, you do have an opportunity now to use the raise hand function. And I'll unmute you as I did Sharon at the beginning of this presentation so that you can ask your question over the audio portion of this meeting. I also will skim through the chat after I stop sharing here. But if you have any questions that don't get answered in the course of this training today, any questions come up, our NSCAS alternate customer service team is available to you from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day and 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. During the testing window and in the weeks surrounding. With that, I'm going to say goodbye to our presentation. And I see that chat has actually been fairly active. If you want to ask a question, you should have a raised hand button that will pop up a little hand next to your name that I can use to identify those of you who have a question. Any hands up right now, so let me look through the chat.
You pretty
Karen,
much
did you
cut
see anything?
Yeah, nothing new from what I brought to your attention as you were doing the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Looks like you were answering the questions in the course of the chat. Thank you for that, Sharon.
Yep, no problem.
All right, and okay. All right, well, that being the case, since there aren't any additional questions, thank you all for your attendance today. I really appreciate the effort that you put in into this to get to know what the processes and procedures are for administering the NSCAS alternate to your students, and of course the effort that you will undertake to actually do the administration. Have a good testing session, good testing window this year. We're here to help. We're always happy to help. We enjoy talking to you, to the district assessment contacts, anyone else who needs help with the NSCAS alternate administration processes. Again, thank you for attending today and have a great rest of your day, everybody.